Thank you very much for your waiting. Now we open International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2025 Part 2, Disaster Countermeasures to Combat Climate Change, the first step toward a nation truly committed to disaster resistance. And I am the Master of Ceremony for today, Rie Shimizu, the PR Officer of Hyogo Prefecture Government. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation to the end of the program. First of all, on behalf of the organizer today, let me invite Yoshiaki Kawata, the Executive Director of Disaster Reduction and Human Innovation Institution, DRI, to give you a few words. Now, Mr. Kawata, microphone is yours. Nice to see you. I'm Kawata. And this International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum has been held by DRI, which was established in 2002. And at the same time, we decided to have this forum. And as you know, at Kobe, not only the disasters, but the various issues are handled by the more than 20 international organizations. And these organizations think it is necessary to carry out international activity. That's why we decided to have this forum. And this year marks the 30th anniversary after the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. And usually we have only one forum in January, but this year we decided to have two forums. So one in January and this one today. And marking the 30th anniversary of the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. But at the same time, at the time that Mr. Ishiba became a prime minister, he talked about the establishment of the Disaster Management Agency, and for which the preparation is being made. And unfortunately, Mr. Ishiba will step down as prime minister in the near future, but we are sure to have this establishment of the Disaster Management Agency in next year. And budget is allocated, and the framework of the agency is now established. So, taking this opportunity, we will have to set the positioning of this international activity. Because, as you know, in last year, there was the earthquake on Noto Peninsula. So, the countermeasure against disaster tends to focus the ones only in Japan. So, we tend to think about it from the viewpoint of disaster in Japan. But today we'll talk about the damages caused by the disasters caused by the climate changes, which have the great impact on the emerging, developing countries around the world. That is a reality. And we have to, or Japan has to come up with wisdom or ways to deal with such disasters in other countries. Fortunately, in this field, we have the high level of achievement in academic or research. So we have to make the clear contribution to this side so that we can see the reduction in the disaster. Especially because Japan has the attitude to think about things from the perspective of academia or research. So not only disaster prevention, but when we do anything, when we try to do the things, sometimes we face the issue of the high cost. And when we think about the situation, there is no other way but to think about the utilizing the result of the academic activities. So sometimes we make the decision based on the cost, but we should not make the cost as a factor which will stop our activities. So we are going into the era when we see the serious and more frequent disasters. And to deal with that situation, we have to utilize the academic ability to come up with the countermeasures. And in this forum today, we will share the ideas how to deploy, how to utilize result of academic activities. So today we'd like to listen to the opinions of the participants, and I'd like to think about it, taking this opportunity. So we do not have the answer yet, but Prime Minister Ishiba once said that Japan should be the country which is well prepared against disaster. Then we have to think, we have to utilize the academic capability as a basis. And at this DRA forum, which has more than 20 years of history, we can show finally a kind of direction to follow. So far in the forum, we get together, had a discussion, and confirm the direction to go. But now, from now, toward the country truly committed to the disaster reduction, we have to place a foundation to make contribution to the world, and whose base is supported by the academic activities. And that's the kind of value we'll reconfirm, and we have to challenge to go up to the next step. And we have a 3-hour session today, and in which I'd like to give you many C's of the discussion, and I'd like to think about many things. So in today, we cannot expect reaching a kind of conclusion or answer, but I'd like you to think about this situation. So Japan can be the country with a disaster resilience or preparedness against disaster. And I'd like you to take a fresh view to find out what is necessary for us to go this path. And thank you so much for your coming to this venue despite your busy schedule. And this information, or this forum, is not contained here in this venue, but is distributed to the outside so that we'd like to reach more and more people and have the support of a wider range of people so that we can go ahead with the disaster prevention. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next, on behalf of Hyogo Prefecture, we will have a greeting from Governor Motohiko Saito. Please note that we have received a video message from Governor Saito. Please watch it. I'm Motohiko Saito, Governor of Hyogo Prefecture. On the occasion of the International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2025 Part 2, I would like to offer greetings as one of the organizers. This forum follows Part 1, Disaster Risk Reduction in the Face of Climate Change, held in January. And in this 30th year since the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, it is a valuable opportunity to deepen international knowledge and cooperation on the global challenges of climate change and disasters. I sincerely thank all who contributed to hosting this event and all participants who have joined again after the previous forum. In the past 30 years, the impact of climate change has grown rapidly more serious, and disasters are becoming more frequent and more severe. This year, we have already seen wildfires in Los Angeles in the United States, record rainfall around Beijing in China, and a massive earthquake off Kamchatka in Russia. In Tuvalu, a small island nation in the South Pacific, sea level rise has made relocation of citizens a real issue, and climate change has become a grave problem threatening the very survival of the states. The situation is no longer a concern for the future, but a reality unfolding now. Last year, the global average temperature reached the highest on record, and in Japan, the summer's average temperature also set a record high since observing began. Climate change directly affects our daily lives, and it is an urgent issue the international community must address together. In Hyogo Prefecture, based upon the experience of the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, we have continued to strengthen disaster preparedness and to pass on the memory of that disaster. Taking lesson from the Noto Peninsula earthquake, we are revising damage estimates and updating disaster plans. In addition, in cooperation with related organizations, we are working to invite the disaster management agencies to establish a base in Hyogo and Kobe. Furthermore, in connection with Expo 2025 Osaka Kansai, Hyogo Prefecture has designated September 15 to 21 as Creative Reconstructive Week. During this period, we are holding this forum, your activity presentation, disaster drills, and other programs. On September 20, we will host a Creative Reconstruction Summit where leaders of disaster affected municipalities in Japan and abroad, together with institutions, will gather. And from Hyogo, we will send out to the world the philosophy of creative reconstruction born from the Hanshin Awaji earthquake. I sincerely hope today's discussion will be becoming a new step toward building a sustainable and resilient society. And I wish all participants health and success. That concludes my greeting.
Next, let me invite Ms. Makiko Ohashi, Director in charge of Cabinet Office, International Cooperation Division, Disaster Management Bureau. Ms. Ohashi, microphone is yours. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the Cabinet Office of Japan, I'm honored to deliver these opening remarks for the International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2025 Part 2. And first, let me extend my heartfelt congratulations on the successful opening of this forum. I'd also like to express my deep gratitude to the Hyogo Prefectural Government, the Disaster Reduction and Human Renovation Institution, and all the members of the International Council on Disaster Reduction and Humanitarian Assistance for their tireless efforts in preparing today's event. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake. It is especially meaningful that as part of Hyogo Expo Week, we are gathered here in Kobe under the theme of creative reconstruction from disasters. Today, government agencies, researchers, private sector, and civil society have all come together for this special forum. And today's discussions will build on the theme of the January forum, disaster risk reduction in the face of climate change, and focus on the next step. Japan's first step toward becoming a truly disaster resilient nation. This summer alone, Japan has faced not only typhoons but also severe localized downpours caused by linear precipitation bands. These events, striking multiple regions simultaneously, have caused devastating damage and posed an urgent challenge for the strengthening of our ability to respond to complex concurrent disasters. And beyond weather-related disasters, we must also prepare for earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and other natural hazards. It is increasingly vital that we conduct scientific risk assessments, anticipate potential impacts, and make the necessary preparations to reduce damage and accelerate recovery and reconstruction. As was mentioned by Mr. Kawata a moment ago, at present, the Japanese government is moving forward with the establishment of the new Disaster Management Agency. So we are receiving the opinion from the Mr. Kawata and other experts to study what the structure should be. And we are consulting the organizational framework for the agency, so the theme of today's forum directly supports this first step toward a stronger disaster resilient nation. On the international stage as well, disaster risk reduction is being highlighted as the top priority in the frameworks of the United Nations, the G7, the G20, ASEAN, and in bilateral cooperation around the globe. And climate change is bringing weather-related disasters to countries everywhere. And as we saw in the recent far-reaching tsunami triggered by the Kamchatka earthquake, disasters know no borders. So cooperation among nations is therefore essential. In 2025, a Hyogo Framework for Action was adopted here in Kobe, and its successor, the ongoing Sentai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Japan's experiences are reflected in these, and both embody the lessons we have learned and as well as our knowledge of creative reconstruction and resilient community building. As we reflect today on Kobe's path of creative recovery, I hope This forum will highlight how Japan's expertise and advanced technologies can contribute to building disaster resilience. I also hope that through the insights and discussions of the distinguished experts here today, we can identify what actions we must take now. And finally, it is my sincere wish that this forum will deepen cooperation among disaster risk reduction practitioners across Japan and around the world. And together, we will continue building safer and more resilient communities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now, we would like to move on to the keynote lecture. Today, we have Executive Director, Disaster Reduction and Human Renovation Institution, Yoshiaki Kawata, under the title Phase Transition in Social Phenomena and its Application to Pre-Disaster Reduction. As for the profiles or bios of the lecturers, please refer to the program due to time constraint. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Costa, the floor is yours. Once again, this is Kawata. Thank you very much. Now, we'll like to talk for about 1 hour from now. So, what I'm supposed to talk today? Well, I will be talking about the phase transition in social phenomena. That is a terminology that I hope that you can remember. 30 years ago, I went to Sannomiya on the disaster-affected area, and when I look at the scene, I was sobbing when I look at the Sannomiya. And I've engaged in the disaster prevention research for over 50 years. After graduating graduate school, Kyoto University became a the teacher, and having engaged in research to counter city disasters. In the course, I have posted many literature to internationally famous journals. In that way, I thought that I was able to contribute. However, when the Hanshin earthquake hit, in front of me, more than 5,000 people died. And it was when I realized that my research was useless. That was what I was thinking at the time. Therefore, when it comes to disaster prevention research, we need to be practical. That was the determination I got. How can we mitigate the damage, and how can we reduce the number of people died from those disasters? We have to make every effort to achieve that, and I was trying my best how we can realize that in my course of research. So right after the Hanshin earthquake, I thought it was the evidence that the next seismic activity would be carried out in the Nankai Trough earthquake. Therefore, since that time, the metropolitan earthquake, Nankai Trough earthquake, or internal other disasters, how can we mitigate the damages? That is the focal of my research and efforts in the course. Uh, the Nankai Trough earthquake or metropolitan earthquake will be a very important national disaster, which was recognized by the Japanese government. And therefore, with regard to these two earthquakes, huge support had been gained from the national government. Having said that, why? Why so many people died in large disasters? We have to explore the reason, but we could not know the reason, the true reason. And when the East Japan earthquake hit Japan in 2011, about 15,000 people died because of tsunami. And a huge tsunami hit Japan, and then as a result, many people died. That was the conception that many people held at the time. And our research center prevention center went to the affected area in the next day and also visited Miyagi Prefecture and stationed there, involved in the research for 6 months and involved in the support activities of local communities. And I visited the tsunami affected area and I made the research why people died and what kind of tsunami hit those area, and we collected such information. And as many as 300 data were collected. When I transcribed that data into the drawings, what happened and what was found? Nothing was found. And I was really struggled to locate such data, but those data were nothing, useless. And that is something that I felt that way. And many times I spread the drawings many times on the desk, and I tried to analyze, looking at the drawings, what could be found. And that was when I was realized that how high the tsunami was, there is a limit, the maximum number of deaths toll. If the tsunami was bigger, it is not the case that the 100% resident would die. There was upper limit of the death toll. That was the discovery I found. And that is the starting point when I identify phase transition. So experiencing Hanshin Awaji earthquake, and I was determined to reduce the number of sacrifice, but I didn't know what to do. But in case of the huge disasters, in a social phenomena, something different happened, and many people died as a result of the change. And that is what I have found as a result of the research. And then I started my research, additional research as well, and reaching to the point of my concept of phase transitions. At your handouts, you may see the leaflets, and there are. This is bilingual. English and Japanese explanations are available. So this means that you can utilize those information handy, and that is why I put together this document. The result of the academic research took a lot of time to make it utilized for practical settings. In actuality, in order to make it reflected in the policies by the government takes a lot of time. However, as you know that we have seen frequent disasters and earthquakes and other natural disasters, we do not have leeway or enough time. When I was active researchers, one of my purposes is to write a thesis with referees. However, until the prints are available, it takes about almost 1 year or so. Therefore, we cannot have such a luxury. Instead, I thought that the research result of it should be transmitted to the front line of the affected area. That is something which is quite important for us. And disaster research is is divided into natural science one and social sciences one. For example, social psychology is there are experts of social psychology. And however, that the research do not have any information why the rainfall occurs. This means that the current disaster research is separated by science and the natural science and geophysics, engineering, and the construction, and also information science as well. So there are many experts in those fields separately. However, those experts do not know the area of no expertise, meaning that disaster research requires collaborative research. everyone understands that. However, in reality, that is not happening right now. Well, it seems to be a collaborative research. However, that is basically the division of expenses. In practice, there is no occasion to exchange views between the researchers of geophysics, civil engineering, architecture, disaster medicine, information science, and others. To, for example, the researchers studying earthquake do not know much about the floods. For example, this kind of situation is now continuing. Large disaster has many characteristics, not a single one. Therefore, for the reduction of such disasters, the current academic framework is no avail. The comprehensive information exchange study is in lacking, and therefore we are not able to cope with massive disasters such as national scale catastrophes. This means that this kind of disaster will never happen in their mind. So that is not my personal view. Rather than having a personal research, we need to have a nationwide research activities encompassing a wide range of experts. And there are such voices. However, we need to prepare advanced disaster prevention. Therefore, in the Nankai trough or the metropolitan flooding, such kind of national scale disaster happens, the disaster preparedness or disaster knowledge from various fields are required. But under the current situation, we cannot do so because they're having their own expertise, and they do not know the scale of the damage. So the all-encompassing measures are carried out, and by the end of this month, there is an estimation of a metropolitan earthquake that is going to be available. However, how can we minimize the number of damages or casualties? We do not have much knowledge and information included.
However, we are making progress with the research in the disaster prevention. So we have to change the way we make the collaborative research. And moreover, the young researchers are less with the experience on the actual site, so they have the problem adapting the result of the research in actual practice use. And last year, we experienced the earthquake on Noto Peninsula. And recently, government and municipality government, when we have the discussion about the disaster prevention, they focus the Noto Peninsula earthquake as a kind of standard. So government asks each municipality to be prepared with a kitchen car or toilet car, so that people can spend the lives at the evacuation centers. That's how they spend the money. But in reality, when they have the kitchen cars or toilet cars, they are of no use. The experience of Noto Peninsula earthquake is not used to enhance the disaster prevention measures. But actual measures taken are of no use, but it is not understood by the government or municipality governments. So experience is very important. So in the past 30 years, after the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, there happened so many disasters in and out of Japan. And on each occasion, the different lessons were gained. So we have to collectively understand these lessons. And in last year's New Year Day, the earthquake hit Noto Peninsula. And what happened after that? For example, the disaster-related death was more than 400. And how can we decrease that number? So to provide a better environment at evacuation centers, especially in Japan, according to severe standard, the environment at the evacuation center in Japan is so bad, so we have to improve it from the point of the social welfare viewpoint. So this is a kind of easy discussion to take place. But how the evacuation center should be, there's a sphere standard by the International Red Cross. But in the developed countries, it is only in Japan and Italy that the official evacuation center is established. In United States or in the United Kingdom or Germany, even in the case of the disaster, there's no public evacuation houses provided. So this sphere standard about the International Red Cross is the standard of Italy. So why the standard of Japan is not reflected in it? Because International Red Cross is specialized in disaster medicine. So it does not pay any attention to the volunteers or other aspects because that is not the main task. And Italy states that the environment of the evacuation center should be equivalent to that of the houses. So at evacuation centers, they provide beds. But when we pay attention to the conditions in Japan, there are people who use the futon mattress on the floor. So because of the standard, international standard, no futon is allowed in evacuation center. So at least the cardboard box bed has to be brought in. And this is the kind of way of thinking about the environment of the disaster evacuation center. So we need the power of culture, not only the civilization. So Italy, all the people use bed for sleeping. In Japan, people use bed, or sometimes people use mattress on the floor, futon. So there is no issue for us to use futon mattress on the floor at evacuation centers. But we tended to think that the way the evacuation center is created is much ahead in Italy than in Japan. But when we studied the condition of the evacuation centers together with Italian researchers, he said that, well, as long as we use the schools, elementary and junior high schools as evacuation centers, we cannot have that good environment. And what he told me is that you can use other facilities. And in local areas, many people, the facilities which can accommodate many people can be found only at the elementary or junior high schools. So we have to think how we can use these facilities as evacuation centers. So his answer that you should use other facilities is not the answer for our needs. So without experience the actual site, and in this case, that they tended to think that they have the more advanced stage of the preparation of environment. I think we cannot come up with a good answer for our needs. So we have to remove the barrier in the research of the disaster. And in English, there are the two words of disaster and hazard. And disaster actually causes the damage. For example, deep in a mountain in Canada, even if the avalanche takes place, there's almost no damage. So in Canada, this avalanche deep in the mountain is hazard. But in Japan, whenever we have the avalanche, there's always the impact in society. So in Japan, the avalanche is the disaster, but both are translated into the same Japanese word of saigai or disaster. So when we deal with a different type of disasters, such as the flood, earthquake, or the high tidal waves, we have to think about a different countermeasure from a different point of view, but that is not done. I am specialized in the urban disaster, and which means that the external force is not only limited to earthquake, there are the other types of tsunami or landslide, a tidal wave. So these are also can be the hazard for the urban disaster. But there's no researcher who are specializing these various types of disasters. Everyone has his or her own specialty and researching them. So when I ask about the landslide with the specialist of the earthquake, they do not know anything. And they say that we are not the specialist of the landslide. So only with us expertise from his or her own specialty, we cannot deal with the situation. But without with absence of the common ideas, we could not have the answer to the situation. But what I'm going to share with you today is the phase transition on the socio-economic or society phenomena is all linked. So not only limited to the specific disaster, we can deal with every kind of disaster. So we can overcome this barrier. So the abnormal external force from the outside is related to this phase transition. That's what I found. And I think this is an easier way to come up with the answer. But we didn't imagine that there's a common phase transition with the external force in the natural disaster. We were not aware of that. So we all thought that if the disaster is caused by the different factor. But after finding this phase transition in social phenomena, I turned my eyes to find the phase transition in natural phenomena. And I found this one. So that means we can have the discussion, the social and natural phenomena at the same table. So in case of the great or severe disaster with unprecedented number of the death, this is related to the phase of transition in the social phenomena. That's why last year, Prime Minister Ishiba declared to establish the disaster management agency to carry out the serious disaster prevention measures. And for that purpose, we can use this phase transition. So I wrote a letter to Mr. Ishiba saying that to hire me as a member of that cabinet office to and Akazawa and Sakai ministers who and a person in charge of the preparation office for the establishment of the disaster management agency carried out a hearing with me. And Mr. Akazawa asked me to explain this phase transition so that even the layman can understand. And I told him that in case of the earthquake directly hitting the capital, if the magnitude is 7.3, as was the case of the Great Hanshin earthquake, there are more than 6,000 hospitals are located in the area which will be hit by this earthquake, and on average 250,000 people are hospitalized there. And in that case of the earthquake directly hitting Tokyo, Tokyo will lose power, electricity, because at the case of the Great East Japan earthquake, the area, the thermal power factory was hit by the more than seismic scale of 6, all lost power and could not produce power for more than 1 month. So TEPCO's thermal power plant, many of which are located along the Tokyo Bay, and wherever the epicenter is, when they are hit by the earthquake of seismic scale of 6, they have to stop more than 1 month.
Then the hospital cannot utilize electricity. For example, in this hot summer, when the blackout occurs, you cannot stay inside of the room. The patient has to be transferred to another hospitals. So when the disaster hit a certain area, they took countermeasures. However, they failed, leading to huge sacrifices. Therefore, we have to assume that outages will occur if a large earthquake hit the metropolitan area. Then the hospital patient has to be transferred to the area outside of the typical outside the area where the electricity is supplied by other than typical. However, there is a traffic disruption occurs during the earthquake period. Therefore, we have to think all of this in order to find countermeasures how we can cope with those situations. Of course, we cannot reduce the sacrifice to zero. However, if we put come up with countermeasures, we can reduce the number of casualties. We will have a different result. Therefore, the preparedness for the disaster is the one that we have to understand what's going to happen in the actual disaster, and then we can predict the phase transition. That's why, starting from January this year, there was the establishment of advisor meeting in the government, and I became the advisor. And I have attended the committee for 6 times, and a report was put together in June this year. However, that report lacks in something because 20 experts um, generate their opinions, and however, there is no criticism generated. This means that the report is somewhat generic and all-encompassing. There is no judgment of good or bad, and therefore we need to think about other ways. Therefore, on the first page of this report, the phase transition of disaster, what that it means, is mentioned in the first page of the report, and then there is a description of phase transition 3 times in the report. That's how I made an effort. Yeah, of course, there are 20 experts involved in the committee, which will create a splendid disaster management agency. That is not the case. We haven't had the in-depth discussions. For example, a disaster DX expert, there are 3 of them, and 15 minutes presentation was given by them. And at the end, the chairman of the committee said, is there any question? And I had asked a question, and I said that you are talking about the good points. Is there any drawbacks? But nobody responded to my question. Why? Because they do not know the actual site. They are discussing on the locating in Tokyo, so they are not able to respond to my questions. They are using drones, and then they make a judgment of emergency site, and that is something that is lacking in the sense of reality. And when the large number of homes are hit and damaged, are they going to visit the homes directly to check the destruction situation of homes? It takes a lot of time, and we cannot wait it until the decision made as for the evaluation of the emergency situation or damage evaluation of homes. We need to think about other ways, and the kind of needs there. We have to have the person who are damaged understood those situations. And this ID 4D from the capture of the damage to the reporting system is now being considered. However, of course, we can utilize the computer. However, how can we utilize the result? Then we will face a huge problem. Therefore, of course, it is important to revise a partial part of the current strategy. However, we have to be prepared for what's going to happen when this hit some area. And was the assumption of the damage reported on March 31st for the Nankai Trough earthquake, and based upon the number of persons in the evacuation center, the disaster-related deaths reached about 52,000. However, this figure for 52,000 is there is no assurance that this number will be the real one, because the disaster-related deaths cannot be represented by a simple indicator. In reality, for example, in Kumamoto earthquake, about 5%, only 5% of the disaster-related deaths was from evacuation center. A majority, 37%, were died in their homes. So when we, of course, we have to think about the condition of the evacuation center. However, the characteristics of the evacuation center will not be necessarily connected to the disaster-related deaths. When we think about those, disaster-related deaths will be more than the deaths from the earthquake itself or a tsunami. According to my estimate or calculation, disaster-related deaths outnumber the deaths from the tsunami. That is the result of my calculation. And when we think about the overall death toll, uh, the disaster-related uh, condolences fund will exceed 1 trillion yen. And this is another factor we have to take into account. So not just increasing its accuracy of estimation in order to have a full-fledged preparation for the disaster, of course, we need to have the assume the calculation of damage, but we have to explore various points relating to damage of the disaster. It may be related to the revision of the constitution. For example, in the emergency principle, the law, and there is a contingency emergency situation in Article 100. However, since the establishment of this the disaster prevention basic law established in 1961, this article has not been adopted. Therefore, we have to make an adjustment of the laws. At the time of a pandemic, we tried to have emergency hospital in Makuhari, but it was not possible to do so because the adjustment law was not done at the time. It takes a lot of time to make adjustment. Therefore, I gave up, and the outfield hospital it was not established. And the contingency clause was included in the basic law and stipulated in 1961. However, there are many laws involved. Therefore, it takes a lot of time to make adjustment or uh, the amendment the related laws. And we have to step that far. So not just for just establishing a fire management agency is not enough. We have to do a follow-up activities. Then I would like to talk a little bit about the phase transition. On the vertical lines, the R, which is the Urban Disaster Amplification Index. What does it mean? In our area of 380,000 square meters, there are 120 people live, and the population density is 330 per 1 square kilometers, and the population density is over 15,000 per 15 square meters in the Tokyo 23 districts. So this means that R would be 50 after dividing 15,000 by 330, and then you can hit the uh, disaster amplification point, and R1 will be a zero point 0.4 or zero point 0.5. This means that alpha 1 multiplied by alpha R, when it if it is 50 multiplied by zero point 0.4, you can have a product of 20. So this means that the number of persons who lose their lives in the earthquake plus, and when we think about there is a generation of phase transition, that the number will be 20-fold. In the Tokyo metropolitan area earthquake, if it directly hit, there is a number that the fire may cause the death of 60 to 100. And but in actuality, there is a risk that the number would be 20 times as many as 1,200. Why that is going to be going to happen? Because of the population density. If that disaster occurred in non-manned area, you can have a sense that there will be fewer damages. Alpha 1 equal 1 means that regardless of the population density, the death toll and will be the population multiplied by the death percentage, and that is the presumption or preconditions. However, if there is a population growth in a metropolitan area, that effect will be added. So T or Y. When the Kanto large earthquake hit in 1923, uh, and M stand for the capital Mexico City data happened in 1951. 10,000 people were dead, and most of them were died because of the destruction of the demolish of the concrete apartment of 10 stories, for example. And in the first drawings, DYM, it was connected for to draw the curves. And when I calculated the Kobe data of Hanshin Awaji earthquake, we can have this the curve when the large earthquake hit in Hanshin Awaji. There was a transition occurred.
And what is the phase transition? Before the Great Hanshin earthquake in 1960 on September 1st, on the day of the Great Kanto earthquake is set as the date for the disaster prevention, and the posters by the firefighter's office is always called for the putting off the fire in case of the earthquake. So even if the earthquake hit the area without the fire breaking out, not much disaster will take place. This is a kind of belief because 90% of the deaths in the Kanto Great Earthquake was caused by the fire. So based on that belief, even with a change in color, the motto carried by the firefighter's office always called for putting off the fire in case of earthquake. And 5,500 people were killed in the case of the Great Hanshin earthquake, and they were killed by the collapsed buildings. And another 500 were killed by the fire. But there are the people who were killed by fire when they were trapped inside the house because of the fall of the furniture. So those deaths directly caused by the fire was very limited. So the old wooden houses are really weak against the earthquake was found at that time, were acknowledged at that time. So to enhance the capability of the old buildings against earthquake is very important. And the same situation happened on the time of the earthquake in North Peninsula. So there were people directly killed by the earthquake whose number is 200, and most of them were lost their lives under the collapsed houses. So the seismic scale of 5 earthquakes was experienced, and there was a weakness in the structure of their houses, old wooden houses. But without having their assessment of their houses, many residents continued to live in that old wooden houses. And when they were having the family gatherings in the day of the New Year, they found that the ceiling collapsed above them because of the earthquake. That's what they experienced. In this way, when the earthquake or disaster hit, there was an environment in which the phase transition can easily take place. Then the bad damage on the human being would be very big. That's what we found. And this is not limited to the earthquake. So when you see this diagram, this original one was prepared by the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure Transportation. So since 1950s, you can find the since 1995 there was a sharp rise in the blue line. So since 1996, there is a sharp rise in the disaster caused by the water or flood. But when you pay attention to the area inundated or residential areas submerged, you can find a decline about a year. So while there is a decrease in area, the disaster damage value has been increasing. Why? because rather than there's more of the inundation above the floor level is increasing in number. So in 2000, there was a heavy rainfall in the Tokai area, and I studied the value of the damage or amount of the waste from the collapsed houses. And zero point 0.7 ton of the garbage is produced from a house which were inundated under the floor level. But in the case of the flood comes over the flood, the amount of the damage is 6 times larger. So when the flood comes over the floor level, the damage is much bigger. So there's a huge difference between the value or amount of the disaster or damage, depending on the level of the flood. So in case of the linear rain band, so the weak point of the levee will be broken or bleached to cause a flood. But in case of the torrential rain brought by the linear rain band, the level of the water in the river increases at one time. So before the levee breach, the flood goes over the levee. So it's not the breach of the levee, but the water goes over the levee. And levee height is almost the same at anywhere. So for quite a wide area, the inundation of flood takes place. And in 2020, in Kumamoto Prefecture, in case of the flood from the Kuma River, there was a nursing home which is located at a rather high place, but that nursing home for the elderly people was under the water to the ceiling, and 12 people lost their lives. And of course, the nurses know that they had to evacuate, but the speed of the water coming to the ceiling was much faster than they expected. That's why they couldn't evacuate and were killed by the flood. So, in case of the torrential rain brought by the linear rain band, the flood or unexpected level of the flood takes place. So, without the breach of the levee, the catastrophic flood takes place. And around 2012, Climate Agency has been reporting the damage caused by the linear rain band. But when you see the data, 10 years before that, we began to see the change in the damage caused by the heavy rains. So the phase transition or phase transitions have been taking place. So when you think about it, we can find the importance of the countermeasures beforehand. And same thing can be said about the pandemic, like COVID-19. So Japan's GDP at that time was 27th on the world. So there were the countries whose nominal per capita GDP was smaller. And you can see the plotting of the infection ratio in these countries. And as you can tell from this graph, among these countries, Japan has the highest GDP and also with the lowest infection ratio, because Japan has the well-established hospital systems and medical systems, and all these costly. So the countries with big wallet, big purse will have the lower infection ratio, which is quite understandable. But when we turn our eyes to the countries whose GDP are higher than Japan, we can expect that their infection ratio could be lower than that of Japan, but result is opposite. They have all higher infection ratio. It's harder to understand it. So these are the economically rich, affluent countries, but with higher infection ratio. This is what the data tells us. So only with the power of the civilization, it is impossible to contain the infection. So with the progress or advancement of the civilization, the countries will be rich in economy. But even with the economic power, they could not contain the infection. This is what the data tells us. Actually, in the United States, in COVID-19, 1.15 people lost lives. In our case, it's 700 million. I'm sorry, 700,000. And there was a big difference, and not much difference in the population between the two countries. So, in case of Japan, if the infection ratio is same as that of the United States, we should lose about 300,000 people. But because of the power of the culture in Japan, we could contain the infection ratio lower than that of the United States. And what it means is that in developed countries, it is only Japan where the people take off their shoes before entering the house. So in Edo period, the tatami mat was developed. So even if you live in a condo, at the entrance, people take off their shoes to enter the house. In other countries, till they go to bed, they wear shoes. And it's dirty. And in Japan, the tap water, the Shinpei Goto, the doctor of medicine of Nagoya University and studied at the Koho laboratories and became the officer of the Ministry of Welfare and became the mayor of Tokyo, preparing against the war against Russia. This person, Mr. Goto, put this liquid chlorine into the tap water in Osaka and Tokyo area, rather than discarding them. And with that, there was a lowering of the infection ratio of the various contagious diseases. So now in Japan, per liter, the so-called liquid chlorine, which can contain the infectious disease, is put. It is an obligation in Japan, mandatory. So all the tap water in Japan have the chlorine in it to prevent the infectious diseases to spread. So even under the corona pandemic or COVID-19, we come back to home and use the tap water to wash our hands and use that water for cooking. And even the water for the toilet, we use that tap water with the chlorine in it, so it can prevent the infectious disease. It's not kind of special medicine to cure the disease, but we have the culture to prioritize the hygiene. That's the way to prevent the expansion of the contagious disease. That's what we found. So not only with the power of the civilization, these things, we should have the power of the culture to contain all these diseases. So for Japan to be the country truly committed to the resilient against disaster, we need not only civilization but also culture. And as you know, we need self-help effort, mutual effort, and public effort or public support to deal with the disaster. And public effort or public help is the one by the public organizations with public fund, and which self-help effort or is an effort by the individual, family members, or community. And then the so-called disaster culture, civilization, is what we have to do. So with that, we know the answer. So the government comes up the policy, and when there is a kind of a skeptical aspect, we cannot proceed with it. So when we know the answer, we can proceed with the policy. Then science is the one which teaches us the answer. And results and policies, when they are linked together, we can come up with the optimal answer. That's how the public disaster prevention measure is taken. As you know, last year in Yasuo City, the sewage pipe fractured, causing great trouble. According to the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure Transportation Ministry's investigation, all around the world, around the nation, there are the old-aged sewage pipes, and 500 kilometers of them have to be replaced immediately. So, special budget has to be allocated for that replacement, to replace all these old sewage pipings. And this is a public support. It's only possible by the public support.
However, and there are other means or the result that is not scientifically or practically backed. And but those kind of things can be achieved with through self-help or mutual assistance, even though they are not scientific. That those will be used for the disaster prevention as well. Yesterday, I went to city of Kurashiki, as you know. It was in 2018, and when there was the West Japan torrential rain, and in Mabi area of Kurashiki city, 58 people died, and 43 people required help. They um, have the wheelchair persons, and they could not go up to the second floor. And as a result, 43 people died, and there was the submerged the flooding card, and it takes about 8 hours for the Mabi area to be flooded with water for the total town. It took about 8 hours, and neighbors could save those people, but in reality they couldn't do so. Um, Many people living there are going to the Mizushima industrial area and living in the prefabricated houses, and they do not know that in the next door there is old people or ladies are staying in the bed, and they did not have much concern about neighbors, and the ambulance station was submerged, and also there was the 1,500 119 calls made. However, all of the ambulance and fire engines were under the water, so they were not able to be operated in such area. When we think about mutual help or public assistance, they're gonna work. But that was when we realized those facts when there disaster occurred. And this is the society that we are living in, which is very difficult situation. Therefore, the civilization itself cannot make us disaster resilient country. We need to have a culture, the disaster resilience culture. And currently, the disaster civilization is on top of the disaster culture. For example, the emergency the flash report of earthquake is nicely utilized. It can reduce the number of damages by the earthquake, but that is not sufficient. So whenever the earthquake hit the area, if the resistor and the breaker, resistant breaker generated, then the fire could be prevented. That was the assumption. When the Kumamoto earthquake hit in 2016, the manufacturer of breaker went to Kumamoto, as many as 300 people. However, there was no electricity conducted fire broke out in Kumamoto, and then the breaker companies started not to work anymore in those areas. So they are only considering about the profitability out of those situations. That's how the fire prevention or disaster prevention companies work or operated. That is the fact that I found. If we, when we think about the current economy, they do not have a sense of mutual support or self-help. The profitability is the core of their business, and that is the starting point of why they are operating their businesses in the disaster area, disaster preparedness areas. So the based upon which is the disaster civilization, but that cannot realize the actual disaster prevention. We have to have a nicer the combination between disaster culture and disaster civilization. When the earthquake hit the metropolitan area, the power outage may out and what kind of damage is expected, we have to evaluate in advance in order to make a necessary preparation. In the social phenomena, there will be a phase transition, and that this phase transition is captured beforehand. We can reduce the number of damages, and based upon the research results so far. By the use of the result of academic research, we'll be able to do something for the preparation of an Nankai Trough earthquake. Of course, we can minimize the damage to nil. However, we will be able to reduce the number of damages and sacrifices in comparison with the current estimate. And if the person evacuate 70%, then the sacrifices as a result of tsunami will be reduced. And we have never experienced the seismic scale of 6 or less for more than 1 minute. And if that continues longer than 1 minute, even though you have earthquake-proof material used for your furniture, it will not work. And also, you will not be able to escape from that space at an early stage. And therefore, how can we prevent such things from happening? These are the things that we have to think about. And the government is saying that the early evacuation of the population of 70% will minimize the damage. However, that is not realistic. How can we realize that? And the overflow flooding of happened in Kumamoto in 2020, the water level reached to the second floor of the building. However, there was no sacrifice found because the timeline was penetrated in Hitoyoshi area. Before the flooding, every person was evacuated from the area. Therefore, there was no sacrifice. As if you take a look at these pictures, those area, the DB is not broken, as you can see. However, through the timeline, there was a pre-notice disseminated to the local residents, so no one was died from this accident. So if you know those unexpected things happening, then you could find a way to counter those potential risks. There are persons who do not follow the direction of evacuation, then they're going to be damaged. The government is now chanting for resilience. However, the resilience itself is not suffice. Resilience is the countermeasures after something happens. Rather, you have to have prepare or in advance disaster readiness. We have to expand the capability for disaster prevention. Then we can fulfill resilience further, and the disaster prevention or preparedness will be necessary. In that sense, I call it new resilience. So it is not sufficient that to reduce the extent of damage after an accident occur. And that its approach is coming from Europe or the United States, the idea of resilience. However, the resistance alone is not enough, because the resilience means that the countermeasures after accident occurred or damage occurred. Therefore, we have to think further to have more sense of prevention of the disaster. Then we can combine it with the resilience. Then we will be able to reduce the number of damages. That is how I have found through my or our academic studies in order to prevent a phase transition from happening. However, we haven't done so far. Therefore, we are just following what happened as a result of the disasters and coming up with the countermeasures against them. So first, we have to identify what would cause phase transition, and then what kind of damages should be brought about, and that can be revealed by the result of our academic research. So we need to consider the countermeasures after we identify the phase-out transition, and then we have to adopt the achievement of our academic research. We have to select, of course, from those results, and in comparison with the phase transition in other academic areas, we have to prioritize what should be done. So simply identifying a phase transition is not enough. We have to effectively use them with, however, that requires a higher level of academic research achievement. We have to think those. Just revealing a mechanism is not sufficient for disaster prevention or protection. That is a very utopia way of thinking. When something happens, a large damage might occur. That is because of some social reason. And if we know that, then we will be able to accommodate the result of academic research or expertise. Then we will be able to realize the advanced disaster prevention.
And we haven't thought about this point. So the advanced disaster prevention can be dealt with the phase transition. That's what we thought. But Prime Minister Ishiba came up with the idea of establishing the disaster management agency. Then we have to think what we have to do, and result of which is now being introduced to you today. So the academic findings have to be adapted in a practical way. And then we can realize the true sense of disaster prevention measures. And let me conclude my keynote lecture now. Thank you very much for your kind attention to the end of the lecture. Thank you very much, Mr. Kawata. Now we'll have 10-minute break, and we'll resume session 10 minutes from now, 2:57. So we will resume the session at 2:57 JST. So please take your seat before that. Thank you very much for kind cooperation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for waiting. We would like to start a panel discussion under the title of the goals of the Disaster Management Agency to be established. I'd like to introduce to you the participant. First, Yoshiaki Kawata, Chairperson, Disaster Reduction Alliance, Executive Director, Disaster Reduction and Human Innovation Institution, and Professor Emeritus Special Assistant to the President, Kyoto University, Eiichi Nakakita, freelance PhD in Science, Izuru Takayabu. And here is a professor, Graduate School of Engineering, Hokkaido University, Professor Tomohito Yamada. Those four persons will be involved in the discussion from now. And as for the bio for each of the persons, due to time constraint, please refer to the program at your hand. Now, I'd like to pass along the microphone to Mr. Kawata to moderate this discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to start the panel discussion from now. The objective is here for the toward the achievement of the goals of the disaster management agency that is going to be established. Not only that, we have the top figures of meteorology and what is now the current issues that are going to introduce them to you. And when we create a disaster management agency, how can we utilize our expertise? This is what we have to think about as a first step for us. In the past, when I was assistant professor of Kyoto University, and there was a Japan Meteorological Association held in city of Gifu, and I asked question there in the occasion, and everybody started laughing at me because my questions are not conventional ones because of the lack of meteorology. Uh, I was a layman at the time in the field and asked questions, and everybody might think that who was that person and why he is asking that kind of question. That is a common sense for all of the person in this field. So the current expertise, experts or specialties are segregated. There is a silo across different expertise. And so we do not know what are the academic achievement made in respective field. So rather than the expert, the person who knows the various fields is very useful. However, that kind of person is useless because they know the facts, but they could not, he or she has not the conclusion of the academic research. But we are living in the information age. More information, more reliable. That is how we are thinking about. So if the information is rapid and sufficient, that is reliable. That is a peculiarity of our age. Although the information is less accurate, the information is much more, then we will tend to trust such information. Therefore, there are lots of people who are claiming such and such information in various fields. When I go to the bookstores, I see a lot of new books, and I was struggling what to select because there are many books. But when we see such pile of books, I would recommend that you would purchase the person who just only know the surface of those expertise because they are not specialists because they do not talk about the evaluation of each academic area. So when you come by the new books, you have to purchase the book which was written by researcher, academic researcher. So the researchers are always struggling with their research and why something is going um, badly. So this is the struggles that every researcher has in our day-to-day lives. So when you become a researcher, you can keep struggling with one phenomenon. So they make a judgment A is better than B. However, no expert cannot have such evaluation. They only cite various examples, but they do not have any conclusion out of their research or just reading information papers. So, but today we have first-rate researchers in their respective field, and they will be sharing us with their findings. So I hope that you can listen to their views, and then we'd like to go on into the panel discussion afterwards. So first, I'd like to ask Nakakita Sensei to make a presentation.
So thank you very much for your introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I am Nakakita from Kyoto University. On the previous occasion, about the scientific focused program of the climate change and how the flood control has been adopted was explained on the previous occasion. Have any of you remember that lecture I gave? And today, within that program of the climate change focused, I want to talk about what I have been thinking. And my background is the civil engineering, and we have the specialist of the climatologists. And working with these specialists, I myself am specialized in climatologies. And I have been working with these two experts on my side for a long time. And today, my presentation title has the words of the edge of survivability, which I have keep in my mind for quite a long time. And 4 years ago, there was a level of the edge of survivability was raised, and how much more it has to be raised due to the climate change. and where we can set this edge has a high level of uncertainty, and I have been wondering what to do with that. And beyond the current level of the flood control, uh, we sometimes experience a tragic accident such as the 311 in Tohoku region, but with the global warming, there's a higher possibility we have such disaster. So we are at the edge of the survivability. So we have to think about our own survival in the face of the expected disasters. And let me talk about what ideas we now have about what to do with this situation. And in Mr. Kawata's keynote lecture, I learned that we have to be aware about while understanding the science behind the mechanism of the disaster, we have to come up with the pre-disaster countermeasures, and not only civilization but the so-called disaster culture. So the disaster culture has to be multiplied or supported by the academic research. I think that is a message by Mr. Kawata, and I want to talk also about this point in my presentation today. And toward the climate change adaptation, I would like to focus the rivers and the expected water-related disaster in your region. So I want to talk about the level of the water flood control to deal with the current situation. So number one point is to review the design values such as the target of river discharge. And the second one is under the climate change. What is the worst case scenario we can expect? We have to pay attention to. So we assume the worst case scenario and how we can assume this worst case scenario scientifically. That's what I have been working on. And the third point is that with the future forecast with high certainty, we have to make the decision which will allow us not to regret. So these three, based on our research results, explained on the previous occasion, now the Ministry of the Land, Infrastructure and Trade and Tourism have the policy on the flood control policy, and update of the about 100 rivers throughout the nation is being updated. So even with the uncertainty, we have to make a decision so that we will not regret. And the policy on the rivers are being promoted along with this idea. And the plan is not related to the number two on this page, but as I explained with diagram later, uh, even the worst case scenario we assume cannot be the worst case. That's the point I want to talk about. And number four is the idea I have in mind for quite a long time. So now the torrential rain in urban areas takes place at a high frequency and anywhere. And those in charge who are dealing with such disasters, or torrential rains, or those who are damaged by such disasters, are now getting exhausted. So there's a kind of breakdown caused by this fatigue. And with the progress of the climate change or global warming, those who are dealing with the situation are getting tired, exhausted, which result in the inferiority in the dealings we make against the ideal status of the dealings, and that will result in a lower level of safety. So today, I'd like to mainly talk about the second point of the worst case scenario. And on this page, the arrow shows the level of the water of rivers or river discharge. And with the global warming, there's the possibility this level will continue to rise. And we already have such a forecast. In the flood control, we have the design value. So this is the target discharge level For example, for the river, every 200 years, we may have the high level of water. And based on that assumption, we have the dams or banks or making the depth of the river deeper or widening the width of the river. And here's a word that by the end of the century, but with a 2 degree centigrade temperature rise, now the policy of the climate change measures are being taken by the national government. And this 2 degree of the rise is a target will contain the rise of the temperature, but we have only 20 years to hit this 2 degree centigrade rise of the temperature. And corresponding to that, the target of the flood control has to be raised. And it was decided in such a way. So now the policy on the rivers throughout the nations is now updated. And this is the basis of the policy now. And we asked for the revision of the plans, and now we have the high reliability of the data about the forecast. And actually, we see the disasters such as the torrential rain in western part of Japan or other parts of Japan. And finally, the national government is moving to change or revise the policy. And above that, there's a expected large-scale disaster which takes us every 1,000 years. So we may expect the super typhoon due to the global warming. And what we have to do under such a catastrophic disaster is shown at the top. And you can find the names of the rivers here, about which the basic policy for river improvement have been updated due to the global warming. In Hyogo Prefecture, we have Kakogawa and Maruyama River, which are included in this revised basic policy for river improvement. And there is a possibility of the super typhoon hitting Japan. The frequency of typhoon may not increase, or in the forecast says that it will decrease. But once it hits, it will be the super typhoon, which is extraordinarily strong in wind velocity, or the volume of the precipitation is very great. And this is one example of the super typhoon which hit Taiwan in 2009. So one large city or village was under the landslide, which was caused by the typhoon. And the landslide at the very deep under the ground was found at that time. And a few years later, also in the Kinki region, the torrential rain hit the area and caused the collapse of the mountains. And also on Noto Peninsula, the landslide dam was produced because of as a countermeasure against the heavy rain. And this is a large-scale landslide dam. And the height of the human being is smaller than this pointer light. So you can tell how large this landslide is. And in the same way, typhoon caused various damages. One is the cases of the Yodo River. So without having discharge from the Biwa Lake, at Uji, the dam is fully filled. And also in the center of the Uji River, at Katsuragawa River, the dam was fully filled to contain water to prevent the flood. But if there's another heavy rain, that might have caused much damage. And in Kyoto, there was some level of flood. So we are at the brink of having the great disaster. And in 2019, in Kanto region, you're gonna find several X marks where the levee was bleached. And also there was a flood over the levee. And according to the municipalities, at more than 100 occasions, there was a flood over the levee, even without the breaking down of the levee. So the situation is very intimidating, and causes of such a situation is the global warming. And that was the result of the calculation by the Meteorological Agency. And what is the worst case scenario of the typhoon we have to expect, for example, along the Tone River? That's the research I have been making, and what measures can be taken. It's not clarified yet, but how much level of a flood can be expected in the worst case scenario was researched. And in the climate change forecast, we have the expected scenario, typhoon and what impact it has on the Tone River when the very dangerous course was taken by that typhoon, and how much a flood can be expected was studied. So we have the rain model, and the rain goes under the ground and came up to the river and goes down the river. And this is the scientific calculation we can make. And for example, the water discharge of Tone River, and this bar is the this is Yatajima. This is the point I'm talking about. And this is the design flow rate at the place of Yatajima in the flood control plan. And I'm sorry, let me go back to the previous slide. And this is the one. So this is the line I'm talking about. And vertical line, I'm sorry, the figures are not shown, but there's a request for the information, specific number on YouTube. So the 22,000, a little bit higher than the Udo River, is the target value for Tone River for the flood control. But when the worst course is taken by the typhoon, we can expect the doubling of the discharge can be expected about 40,000. So actually, in that case, in upstream, there may be the landslide, so the water discharge may not be so high, but this is a kind of possible worst case scenario we can assume. And already, with Tone River, we revised the water discharge plan. And in case of Tone River, let me go back. And here is 22,000, but now it is raised to 26,000. So due to the global warming, the water discharge level is raised in the plan. And here it comes. So 22,000, 26,000, the plan is revised, but above which we also expect the 44,000 level. In that case, that is a flood which covers the whole town or whole urban areas. So at this point, we are facing the severe or catastrophic disaster, which will put us on the edge of the survivability. But with the global warming, there's a higher probability we may face such a situation called edge of survivability or survivability critical. And this is what we will face in the global warming, and we have to think about the measures against such a situation. And I will not go into the details on this page. How much time do I have more? Oh, we have to conclude? Okay. And I'm sorry for taking so much time. So, in order to deal with the worst case scenario, the third from the top, and we have to introduce the adaptation against the worst case scenario or target. And on next page, we talk about the resilient countermeasure, and we have to take the resilient measures so that we can reduce the death toll to zero. And listening to Mr. Kawata's presentation, I found that this resiliency is very important in the face of the disaster. But even before the disaster, we have to think how we can take measures in a resilient manner and where the various expertise and wisdoms can be utilized. And at the very bottom, there is a kind of message we have to avoid the earlier was the danger or risk to live on. I'm sorry I'm running out of time, so I may stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next, Takayabu Sensei, please. Thank you very much. Takayabu speaking. I am a freelancer, and together with Yamada Sensei and Nakakita Sensei have engaged in the project how we can use the meteorological data, and also IPCC 6th evaluation report was issued in 2023, and I was dispatched as a representative of the government engaged in writing the reports I'd like to share with my experience. The one of the motivation of the meteorology is weather forecasting. When French warship sunk in the Mediterranean due to a storm in 1854, plotting a weather chart revealed that the storm had come from the west. Thus, meteorology had a highly practical aspect. Having said that, the geophysics is a branch of natural sciences, and the motivation to understand the laws of nature has always been strong as part of the strong motivation. So there are two motivations involved. In geophysics, the mechanism development of mid-latitude cyclones and typhoons have been clarified, as well as the mechanism behind the occurrence of El Nino. Meteorological and oceanic phenomena span a wide range of scales from the global to the very small, and the tools used differ depending upon the scale. And I like to present it in the bus stack diagram. An approach with a resolution appropriate to the phenomenon is required. This is an analogous example. On the left-hand side is that ambiguous figure on top of the desk. On the right side, as you can see, the bus stack is situated. And what is telling from these is as follows. When it comes to meteorological information, the primary information is based upon the global model. Then it involves a various type of information. On the other hand, local communities and autonomies, local residents' needs more precise and detailed information as shown on the right-hand side, what is specifically on top of the desk. And there is a huge gap between these two, spatially and also timely. There is a gap between the two. In order to fill the gap, the method is required, which is called so-called downscaling methodology. When you think about that, they may sound a little bit obscure. However, in a day-to-day, the model is used for the weather forecasting, for example. When it comes to climate projection, the global model is often used, and then extreme weather is becoming even more intense. In accordance with the IPCC AR6 Working Group 1 carries this picture. At the top, 1.1 degrees C, 1.5 to degrees C, those are the global model based figures. On the far left, we currently having a 1.1 degrees C or 1.2 degrees C rise. And those extreme situation has been continuing. For example, the temperature increase in the highest temperature over 10 years, or drought increase the frequency of droughts occurring once every 10 years, precipitation, and third, changes in the extent of snow-covered areas, and fourth, as Nakata Sensei mentioned earlier, this is about tropical cyclones, increase in the proportion of increased tropical cyclones. And if you take a look at those figures, that is the tendency of declining in terms of the snow. However, when it comes to other extreme weather, there has been will be an increase as temperature rises. Though the extreme weather will increase as well. So how can we expert in the meteorology approach? And the sensei mentioned earlier, and the meteorological information only generate hazard. For example, this wolf can as represented by the wolf as a hazard, and how can it connect it to the social risk? For example, exposure, vulnerability need to be included. We have to. It is not possible to assess the risk of disaster that impacts society if we, unless we accommodate such information, and that represented by the exposure as three peak and the small peaks are located there, and they are engaged in building various homes, and then the story is generated. So when we think about those, what is our role? Our role is at the top here. In the IPCC, the connection with society is picked up as an important theme. In the AR6, the co-chairman talked about adaptation of working two and working three. Information exchange, you need to be aware. And this is the result of by working group 1 and chapter 10 and include this picture as a symbolic one. And there is a distillation process at the center. Not only the expert in meteorology, the stakeholder need to be accommodated. As mentioned at the bottom of this slide, there are many persons of interest. Together with them and coming together, information distillation is asked between the scientist and the stakeholders. Information quality need to be enhanced and more matured after distillation, and this can only be done by the scientist alone. Other stakeholders will be needed. And when it comes to the evaluating extreme events, there are also climatic phenomena called the tipping points that need to be considered in risk assessment. The tipping point, there is a likelihood. However, it will give a high impact, probability but high impact that should be considered. And it may a little bit deviate from today's discussion. However, this includes such as things as the collapse of the Antarctic ice sheet and dieback of the Amazon rainforest. And also, additionally, there are social tipping points. From the stable points to stable and another stable point, there is a transition which is called tipping point, and it will never return. And and also there are the positive and negative tipping points involved here. For example, positive one includes the positive tipping, the decarbonization society, and also the climate tipping point may destroy the society. That is called a negative tipping point. When it comes to climate change research as a whole, it has a highly practical aspect in terms of mitigating disasters. The disaster prevention is a prime target, but the role of meteorological researchers is to provide geophysical explanations for occurring phenomena, and at the same time to offer appropriate information while consulting with stakeholders. However, both of them should take a very difficult balance to do the research. So to be honest, I'm struggling on a daily basis. That's all. Thank you very much.
Now, next is Professor Yamada. I am Yamada from Hokkaido University, and let me propose one topic to discuss. And the title of my presentation is Climate Change and Water Disaster Risk. And Mr. Takayama talked about the tipping, and there are the various patterns of rain and causes of the typhoons were explained by Mr. Nakakita. And based on that, I want to talk about where is the point which causes a severe damage to the specific area, from which point we cannot return to the original state. And using the scientific or statistical uh, viewpoint or from the lessons from the past experiences or policies, will come up with the measures. And then Professor Nakakita talked about the progress of the information provision about the liver related disasters and how they can be closely linked to the countermeasures on a community basis has to be considered. And technologies available in Japan is excellent, and how we can get them closer to the international standard is another point I want to pay attention to. And here is my main message. So, with the result of the latest science and with accumulation of the observation data, we can predict what can happen in the future, and we can discuss it for the purpose of decision making. And I think in this sense, Japan is well advanced. And it is very important to study the expected external force which caused the worsening of the damage in case I talk about the rain. And also we have to calculate the expected risk coming from the progress of the climate change and look back when backcasting way we should talk about what have to be done at this moment. And on the left top you can find the graph which shows that how many times we have to use the dice to come up with a probability of the 1/6. So only after 100 or 200 times of the shaking, we cannot see the result of the 1/6 of the probability. So roughly, we can get closer to that, but there's uncertainty, as was mentioned by Mr. Kawata when he talked about the disaster culture. So, even if we have uncertainty, how we can use them for the decision making. So, when it comes to the water rainfall, it is about the hazard. So, in the past 70 years or 80 years, we have the collection, accumulation of the observation data, and with which there not many things could be alleviated. So, we had a picture of the dice with the R's pattern on it. So, how we can proceed with the decision making about what is coming, what is assumed to happen from now. So, in the past, Fisher said that every year we do not know what actually happens, but we have the anticipation about what range of the things can happen in what severity. And we are now seeing a kind of certainty or an answer for such questions. And here you can find the issues related to the individuals and businesses. And at the top for the individuals, this is based. This is a questionnaires carried on the victims of the 2018 torrential rain. And about the question, what triggers the evacuation action? Many replied that the change in the surrounding environment. And sometimes this change in the surrounding environment is the one which is too late for the people to evacuate. So, I think if they are more understanding about the situation, they can accelerate the evacuation activities. And the second point is that there takes place many various exercises and drills against the disasters, but they are the very specific ones, so there's no cross stakeholders type comprehensive drills. And sometimes the scenario used for these drills are the ones in the past and not the latest type rainfalls, so whose pattern is quite different from that of the past. And at the bottom, for the businesses, especially for the listed companies, they are requested to have the assessment of the risk, paying attention to the climate changes based on the international standards. But they have to conform to the international standards, which requires the qualitative evaluation. And many Japanese companies are trying to come up with a quantitative evaluation. And this is a material I used when I was involved in that effort. So, as you can see here, uh, among the developed countries following United States and others, Japan is experiencing large-scale water disasters because of its topography. And the west side there's the Tibetan mountains, and the from the south side and north side, the monsoon and wind with much moisture come to Japan. So it's like on the backside of the bridge and the river. So there are so many possibilities brings the disaster to Japan. So Japan is located in an area where we have to take various measures. And we also summarized the result of the analysis observation. And you may heard about the probability of the 100 cases. So every year, there's 100th of the possibility that torrential rain takes place. But now, from now, the 63% of the probability that larger torrential rain may take place. And the data from the late 20th century and 21st century are quite different. So the extreme value distribution of heavy rain in 21st century and late 20th century are quite different. So as you can see here, the information about the rains from the 20th century is quite different from the current ones. So how should we interpret the past cases and how to reflect them in the future? So climate change, we calculate the calculation specific to Japan's feature, which was led by the Professor Takayama and others in the project under the Ministry of the Education. So the dynamics of the locate and in the case of the disaster is calculated in detail. And there may be the case that unprecedented or unexperienced disaster may take place. This is what we have to include in the target of the subject of the discussion. So when we think about the future, we have to calculate what can happen and have to utilize the result of which in the decision making. And when we make the calculation for the whole Earth, it is difficult to adapt it to Japan, to specific situation. So we have to downscale it, this dynamics calculation to Japan. And later I'll talk about the examples about Kyushu region. And when we see the simulation results, some of them are similar to that of the Kuma River flood. And in Hokkaido in 2021, there was a large-scale typhoon and a similar case could be seen in the simulation. So, from the experience and also from the simulation of the forecast, we can tell there may take place such large-scale disaster. And finding that similarity is not enough. So we found there's a kind of pattern in the rainfall. So in the future, as you can find the right bottom, from now the rain will be more heavier and more localized. And you can find the water discharge on river at the time of the maximum water fall or precipitation. And in the case of the 200 precipitation, how the rain falls, there's different types of risk. So when you pay attention to the left side, my message is that in the future, time-wise and space-wise, the rainfall will be more narrower. And we are producing various patterns of the rainfall in the forecast, and which is summarized in the right top. So when the heavier rainfall are expected from now, we have to take them into the flood control policy from now. And the various patterns of the rainfall should be adapted to various places and regions to expect what kind of risk can be expected. And on the right bottom, you can find the image about the expected value of the disaster damage, and vertical line is the probability of the disaster. And you can find the curves. And with these curves, you can find what combination of the measures, such as software measure and hardware measures, have to be taken, so that this curve can be smaller and lower. And while we are working on this, at each community, we are carrying out the disaster drills or exercises. So various stakeholders now began to take part in the disaster drills based on the similar simulation results. So I'm carrying out this demonstrative exercise in Hokkaido. So various stakeholders carry out the exercises based on the similar scenario. And it is sometimes difficult to carry out the disaster exercise when we are not actually facing the disaster, but the timeline for the disaster response and prepared as against the disaster would be important from now. And in Overhido City, the businesses carried out the regional exercise or drills with about 3,000 people, and it was like a kind of festival. So you can find the words of the collaborative water-related disaster prevention training. So it's based on the community, but using the latest scientific information and cover or involve the older people in the region. That's what we're trying to carry out. And we'd like to link it to the water disaster drill by the national government, so that the attention can be paid to these people who are active on the forefront of the providing such disaster drills. And we'd like to see them, many more communities participate in such movement at the same time with us, so that the science can be utilized on a community basis in various ways. And I showed you the risk image here with the glove. And please pay attention to this 3D glove. So this is about the expected number of decibel and also the probability of the lethal disaster. And you're going to find the timeline. And what measure is required to most effectively reduce the number of decibel is shown here. And the reason why we focus risk is that when the external force is too huge, we need the relative comparison against the other fields, because this is a cross boundary of the academic fields, and decision making should be the one which is a cross boundary. So academically and socially, it is important to have the relative comparison to the other fields. So by the external force, as you can see here, we have to think about the various fields. And the horizontal bar is the precipitation amount, and the vertical line is the benefit versus cost. And you can find the absolute value of the B versus C. So the relationship between B and C and it is usually smaller than the B minus C. And so far, we didn't have much information about the various patterns of rainfall or the damage on the river, so we couldn't visualize such information. But now we can tell how much efficiency we can expect from the measures at the certain level of the rainfall. So, seeing the situation, as you see in the pictures, immediately after the Noto earthquake, if the width of the roads are a little bit wider, we could reach the people in need immediately and alleviate the disaster damage. So, with what scientific theory as a background, we have to come up with the countermeasure is important. That was my last page. And internationally, and this is the one we would like to talk about. So these ideas are shared with the international researchers and also the policy makers that it's important to take the balance. And last year in Japan, we had the opportunity of the international conference related to IPCC, and we had attendance of the Ministry of the Land, Infrastructure and Transportation and Trade. And also on that occasion, we had the opportunity to learn from Mr. Kawata and Professor Nakakita. So we are trying to link the effort in and out of Japan. That is a message from the last page. Thank you very much. That's all for me.
Thank you very much. In each of the meteorological field, they have presented us the most advanced or cutting edge of the research. And the problem is, how can we use those expertise which we do not know yet? Only knowing mechanism can reduce the damage. That is not a simple answer that we can expect. In each field, what should be done? More concrete measures will be needed, and also we need to let the non-expert know about the most advanced research result from the meteorology. Then, how can we interpret regional, I mean, line-shaped convective system? At the top of the sky and high concentrated humidity, it is air phase will become a liquid phase, which is another transition of the phase. And our meteorological agency, if it is captured, then the weather prediction can be done. That is the way how the meteorological agency is following. However, there is a weather later. However, that humidity is not reflected in the weather satellite. Then, for example, when the Himalaya 15 is launched in the future, and the high sensitivity infrared red sensor is attached, and if the humidity change can be captured by the sensor, then the line-shaped convective system can be captured when and where the torrential rain will be caused by the system. That kind of prediction would be possible in that case. So that the situation should be notified or disseminated to us by the agency. However, on the other day, the IR sensor development is done in a U.S. Company. However, they are saying that it is not possible to develop such kind of IR sensor at an early date. Then this means that we have to postpone the launch of Himalaya 15 because we cannot attach a sensor to the satellite. And this kind of information is not being generated from the meteorological agency. That is quite regrettable. As for the researchers, they are trying to say the good points about their research. However, as for the drawbacks, sometimes they conceal such information. Of course, we are not willing to conceal such information, but be it Nankai Trough or earthquake, we have such cases. We have emergency, the tentative information generated last year, and detailed information is generated from the head of the meteorological agency. The semi-crack other information is disseminated from the agency, and such a piece of meal information is generated one after another. So this means that we got a lot of information one after another. Then what happened? The disaster preparedness or response will be working well if we have such a wide, massive amount of information, but that is not the case. That is something that we have to think about. On, on November 12th, the Tokyo Research Institute of Earthquake will commemorate 100th anniversary. From Tokyo University, I got information and invitation letter. And November 12th, I have another commitment, so I will not make it. But if I do not have another commitment, should I attend that meeting to celebrate the researchers, or should we score at the researchers that the earthquake prediction will not be available even after 100 years of research? Because the government has already invested in this field to the tune of 100 billion yen so far. When we look at those realities, the result of the research, it should be utilized for the future disaster prevention or response, and that kind of communication should be done. And those are the things that we have to think about as a precondition. And then when I was talking about the phase transition, and from each expert standpoint, whether or not the people can believe phase transition possibilities, what should be needed? When the phase transition occurs and then the line-shaped convective system is generated, causing a huge damage, that is for sure. But based upon your standpoint, in your expertise, how can your research connect to that? Of course, I am not asking for any resolution. However, is it possible to connect your research to the prediction of a line-shaped convective system, for example? Maybe you might be saying that research is nothing to do with that. However, without the capabilities of expert, we will not be able to resolve the issues in the meteorological field. I'm not the expert of the meteorology, but I'm just saying that the phenomena called phase transition occurs as a common principle. But just identifying a phase transition principle will not mitigate any disaster in the future. How we can mitigate it or reduce it? There are unresolved issues. We have to review those. And from your standpoint, in a respective expertise, you have different viewpoints, right? So I would like to be educated on them. So Nakakita Sensei, can you please start? Thank you very much. You're talking about L1 and what had happened. So I'd like to talk about it. L1 means that 100 years probability flow rate change, and that is believed by the Japanese government. We have been collaborating with them. Our scientific research is believed by the government, and then how um, and based upon the scientific research, we conveyed our message for the rationale to the national government. And for example, the probability in Hokkaido it will become higher and the less in Kyushu area. We uh, accommodate and deliver such information in order for them to make a decision for flood control, and that is the biggest achievement that we have made. And on top of that, the changing objective is one of the paradigm shift, and the other important factor is how we can accommodate after changing the targets or objectives. And we have exchanged views with different researchers, and the long last the flood control in the space is now being considered between academia, industry, and government altogether in order to achieve a sustainable water control or flood control will be realized. And under this slogan, we are making effort and all together, and then by all and a sustainable approach is being generated as a concept. And then that has become a huge second paradigm shift. That is one of our achievements as well. So, as you mentioned earlier, there are many things to be done, and we need to have the imaginary mindset of what's going to happen by a community base, by regional base, and then we need to have a quantitative approach as well. Of course, we have to calculate the possible amount to be damaged and or required for the countermeasures against disasters. And this kind of framework is now being formulated. And then the government has a belief in it. And the next step is what should be done after the disaster occurs. And then that government administration is now thinking that that kind of image.
Thank you very much for your comment. So, what do you think of this, Mr. Takava? So, as was introduced by Professor Nakakita, oh, do I have to comment on that point? Okay. So, what you described is very hard to react to because that is the researchers only talk about the benefits. And when we produce a thesis, we always talk about the benefits. So it's harder to find the weaknesses. So I think this is related to the issues in communication. So specialists know the limitations. And with understanding the limitations, what it would be possible to say is announced as a kind of publication. So this method can be feasible for this area, but not for the other area. So we have that understanding. So I think we need to have the thorough discussion so that we can have a good understanding about every case. And next is the flood control for the rivers. So we came up with a probability in case of the 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise. And the officials from the Ministry of the Land said that what you're talking about, the result of the research, and they accepted that the probability of the change in the future according to the progress of the climate change, and which was very encouraging for us. And we we found that our results of the research is now reflected in the new laws or regulations. So there's a kind of trust between the specialists of the meteorology and the people from the Ministry of the Land Infrastructure and Transportation and Tourism. And driving force for us was the research by Professor Yamada with the very detailed model, especially about the small and medium-sized rivers and the flood of these rivers. So I'm not the expert of the river, but first in the small and medium-sized rivers, in the future, they are the first one to have the flood. And that is a kind of theory by Professor Amada, and his findings was a kind of driving force for me to go with my research. And of course, sometimes I see some difficulties, but we need to continue to overcome these difficulties in my research. So thank you very much. Can I have a say from Mr. Professor Amada? Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'd like to share with you some viewpoints and answer your questions if I can. So, the current situation we are in now, various countermeasures and initiatives by the community, we do not have much quantitative look back of what were done so far. But now, after the series of researches, we can have the good review of the or assessment of what we have done so far. So, how much safety was achieved and what change were brought by these activities, initiatives in the past. And I think we, those in the scientific area, have the role to clarify the situation to come up with the better countermeasures. And about the flood control at each region, what specific countermeasure is possible is sought after. But each one has its own role, and how much impact can be achieved by the specific measure is now being quantified, which allow us to have the discussion at the same table. So I think there's a good contribution by the people from the science and also from the other backgrounds. And in the past, we cannot repeat the past, but there are the various possibilities possible available from the past. So we have to use the experiences of others adapted in ours or in the focus of ours. And about the climate forecast, weather forecast, the ensemble analysis is made, and we do the same for the climatology so that we can have the greater backup support for the weather forecasting. And accuracy required would be improved. And we have to have the observation as an integrated part. And you talked about the linear rain band. And in case of Japan, various initiatives have started. For example, the observation of the steam over the ocean would be very important. And when you see the ocean, there are so many vessels going on, and we should find the better way of using data from the observation. And I once worked for NASA in the United States, and they make an observation of the hurricane by flying the aircraft into the cyclone to find the ultimate cause of such phenomena. And in Japan, we do the same activities. So, by working in such a way, I think we can find a breakthrough the current situation. Thank you very much for your comment. So, from each one of your viewpoint, you delivered us what we have to do or can do. And today, we will talk about the goals to be achieved by the coming disaster management ministry, I'm sorry, agency. And when that ministry is established, whether they can have the system or organization to proceed with what you described today, especially meteorological agency is related to any of the ideas you described. So maybe led by the Ministry of the Meteorological Agency, the other ministries such as Ministry of Land Transportation Infrastructure may proceed with these initiatives. But when the organization is complicated, it's hard to see the smooth progress of the projects or initiatives because decision making will be very difficult. And that is what you can find with the IGPP. So when it takes so much time, whether really the disaster prevention or mitigation can be possible is a big question I have to ask. So, at the time of the establishment of the Agency for the Disaster Management, the climate disaster should be prevented, and we should have the research structure or organization for that purpose, which would be the big issue. And it's not only about the bigger allocation of the budget, and we need more expertise on this point. And without that, even if we have the disaster management agency, we cannot say that we can prevent the large scale disaster. But we have to, in order to have the big impact, we have to have the disaster prevention management agency to be prepared, to be able to say we can prevent large scale disasters. So first point is that what change we have to make with the existing research structure or organization so that we can make the progress with the ideas you described today. So including the countermeasure against the global warming, it is the real-time forecast which plays a role to prevent the disaster damage. As I have been talking about the linear rainfall for quite a long time, so I think it's too late to talk about now. But now the budget is allocated for the observation for, and I don't know how this money is spent at the meteorological agency. So what I want to say is that the the accuracy, higher level of accuracy with the torrential rain allow us to take various measures, and including the flood control along the river side, we think about various methods, and we have to raise the accuracy of the forecast. And to achieve that, we need more specialists of the meteorology, especially the huge torrential rain brought by the linear rainfall band. And that is very specific to Japan and Asian countries. So we have to have the enhanced research structure for that purpose. So a meteorological agency needs to have a greater number of researchers. And then, so I have been working with Takayama-san, and not only the general image to raise the accuracy, we have to think with that a more accurate information or a forecast of what would be possible. That's why we have been making the progress and could move the meteorological agency. So to raise the accuracy of the torrential rain forecast with a scientific manner, and what the usage of that accurate forecast should be understood in collaborative research.
So the to the point of projection and research will be needed, and also the number of researchers should be increasing the in order to accommodate the needs for the newly established agency. And of course, we have to provide funds to university. A fair distribution of of budget will be needed, and also the meteorological agency can be using such kind of funds. That is another approach. Takayama-san, can you please share with your view? Well, I am not have not been engaged in the core operation of the meteorological agency. However, from the perspective of the researchers, the benefits of the climate projection or expectation is done by the researchers. The ensemble projection is now being utilized for the current researchers. And on top of that, the researchers are engaged in another research of what can be done next. So the weather forecast is being carried out in that way, and prediction information is provided by the researchers. And of course, there are issue of research fund that this is another difficult issue to deal with, not only in Japan but also in outside of Japan as well. And the role of the meteorological the disaster management agency is for the control of the current operation. Therefore, if there any prediction is generated from them, there is a specific group to have the certain budget for the current practices. In order to distribute the fund to the researchers, they have to have a different set of organization. So this is that what I am thinking about. Yamada Sensei, what do you think? Thank you very much. Well, disaster prevention, when we think about that, one of the issues is that we have snowballing data and the reproduction prediction and also the observational data uh, ready. However, with the new technology, update will be necessary. However, we have to sort out the data. However, we should not um, throw the past data away. And so the kind of data sorting will be another area that is quite important for Japan as well. And the data the sorting is being carried out manually, and so that such kind of way is not sophisticated, and therefore the observational data, prediction data are accumulated, and from which that another information can be disseminated. However, the data specific to disaster prevention is something that we have, because in order to cope with the emergency situation, we cannot create a specific projection or precise ones. And when the science has taken different new approaches, we tend to make effort to interpret the new technologies and techniques. And we are struggling to interpret those new information, but it is quite meaningful. Accessibility is another thing that we have to consider, but not just easy access to the information is not does not resolve any issue. On an ordinary situation, we have to share the accumulated data. Of course, we all have to think about the emergency situation, but we have to be more flexible to think about how we can connect the ordinary situation to the emergency situation from the perspective of the response. The issue is, at any rate, the research level needs to be enhanced. Is that right?
やっぱり日本のね、科学研究員っていうのは、
On the Japanese spending for the scientific research, of course, there are various research fields, and researchers are asking for the budget,
要するに採択件数を割り振るんですよ。
and the number of the research application would be uh, is um,
採択件数をもと、研究費用を
the basis of the calculation of the budget allocation. That is good.
アメリカは違うんで
So
すよ。
more you research apply the many subjects to get a
アメリカは
more
30%、40%
uh,
とか
ex-
そういう、
research funding. However, in the United
そ
States,
の
that
レベ
the
ルの
story is different.
やりなさい。
If the government
それは
think that
例えば
this research is
日本は
needed,
そこやりま
that
す。
this a
です
certain
けど、
amount of
その
research fund is ready for
特
them.
にやる場合
So
は、
if the research involved in a specific research
それに
subject,
優先的に
they
候補
can be
されます。
prioritized to
それは
have the
例えば
research
日本
fund.
の場合は
For
我々の研究
in
は
case of the United States for the
第一
disaster
水曜日、
prevention,
土曜日、
in the first
第一水曜、
Saturday of
土曜日
July in
の
Denver,
第一
Colorado
水曜日
State, scientists researchers gathered together to hold
話が
workshop and NFF
それ
on
で
the
その
representative
時に
come around,
話
and
した
then
時に
they are
そこからずっと
introducing that such and
そ
such a
の
budget
話
are
を聞い
allocated to a
てじゃあ
specific
日本の
scientific
テー
field.
マ
And
を
then
人に
the researchers
伝
gathered
えれば
there may think that they would
いろんな
change their
可能
research
性が
field.
出てくるんです。
That is another
やっぱり科学
possibility.
研究費っていうの
And the
は
research
お給料と
expenses,
かも入ってるし、
of course,
学生の
includes
雇用とか
payrolls and also
も入って
the
ます。
money to hire
だからそ
students.
れは組織が負担するんじゃなくて、国が負担
So
するんですよ。
those research funds are provided by the government, not by the universities
それ
or
は
institutions themselves.
私が京都大学の教授の時
When
に
I was a
早稲田大
professor
学
at
の
Kyoto
先生
University,
3人でやってたら、
and
日
I
本の大学で
became the
その
professor
学
at
問を
the
やることができるじゃないですか。
Tokyo University.
それは県外の大学
We
が
I
それぞれの給与をちゃんと
I was not paid
説明
from both of the universities, only from the
その
Kyoto
まま
University. But that is not the case in the United States.
日本
Based
の大
upon your
学の人材
contribution, you get payment from both of the
が
institutions,
そ
for
の
example. So when you
学生
hire,
のことを考えて
so that university
それ
can
を
employ
その学
students
生のため
as a
の
research
ベネフィットが
assistants.
ちゃんと
So
用意されてないんですよ。
those are
日
the
本の場合
benefits.
は県
But
外
in
の
case of
方が
Japan,
ほとん
of
ど
course, the research
な
and
ぜかという
development
と
expense will increase. However,
すぐに雇えない。
when you think that you want to hire
だから
somebody, you cannot do
我
so
々
with the
の
research
大学
money.
に来て
So,
この
as you know,
大
that
学に来て
the disaster management agency will be created, and new things have to be done. However, if we are to
で
continue
そ
the
れがで
current
きるんだけ
research,
ど
the excellent
県外
researchers
の資金源っていうのが
are needed. However,
見えてないんですよ。
we are now seeing the environment such excellent researchers cannot work quite effectively and efficiently. That is, we have to do
それだ
something
けなんですよ。
because that kind of,
なんか色をつけ
the
て
evaluation or
そういう資金源
to give priority to specific area
それだ
are
けなん
the
ですよ。
ones that Japan is not excelled
憲法は
because the public
全部
the fund should not be used for a specific field. That is a common sense that we have
やって
being
そ
the
れを
researchers of
その
organization and
大学
working
が国の
for the institution, the
大学な
payment
んです
is
よ。
made to a researcher. That is a
その
commonplace.
海外
However,
の国で
in Japan, the only one payment can be allocated to one
なんで
research area or researchers.
組織的な
So this kind of organizational response is
それ
really
ができないんですよ。
have the bottlenecks. So I know that you have experienced a similar one,
それが
similar
それぞれの国で
experiences in the past. So those are the
それぞれの
bottlenecks, and we'll have to overcome those. I now understand that point.
この経
Then,
済体制の
under
中
the
で
current research system, can we do so?
それ考えていかな
Can
い
we
と
make it? We have to think about that, unless otherwise,
目標を見たところでずっと終わっちゃうんで
we just keep looking at objectives and we will not be getting nowhere.
難しいんですよ。
I think it is a very tough question
ちょっと
for us to resolve.
例えばインド
But is there any
の
hint
話
of what we have to do?
でございます。
Can please start with Nakita
で
sensei?
いろいろ話するとじゃあ本当に
I think we are seeing the improvement little by little. I think from the Kakenhi budget, we can pay salary. So at Kyoto University, maybe not under the name of the Kakenhi, the scientific budget, there's a change with the system so that there's a drastic change with the Kyoto University to for such a wage system. And when we carry out the research on meteorology, sometimes our research is not covered by the Kakenhi scientific budget by the Ministry of Education, but we get together under the certain project by the other ministries. Or sometimes the Ministry of Education reacted to that because of the importance of the research. So for more than 20 years, these researchers have been carrying out the research in a very favorable environment. So we have to see more of these cases from now. So SIP is the same case. So the research is required to be more practical, so not about the fundamental study, but for the researchers in this field, the very rich budget is provided by the Cabinet Office. So I think Cabinet Office is leading the improvement in the area you talked about. That's why the Disaster Management Agency can focus more of such researches of the disaster prevention. And of course, universities have to go through transformation. So we have to set up the environment in which researchers can make more money when they do more of the research. And I now see the kind of sign of the drastic change to come. So what do you think of this, Mr. Takayabu? Well, I've been working for. I don't have any say on this point. So young researchers who have wedges not only from the university but from the others and are involved in education. So I think we have to prepare the environment so that young researchers can accept this kind of semi-independent status so that we can have the more talent in the pool of the researchers within universities, and that can bring the different viewpoints. And the system in the United States, we do not say it's a perfect one, but the flexibility and the kind of specialty we have in the research is a kind of point to have more talented personnel for the universities so that we can keep excellent personnel in Japan or in universities in Japan. Thank you very much for your point and comment. So from the each panelist, as was introduced now, so I found the phase transition, which is epoch making, but and I said that the Ministry of the Disaster Management will work successfully. But listening to the three panelists, I found it be difficult to for the newly established agency to be successful because in reality we face many obstacles, and to remove these obstacles and barriers would be extremely difficult. But without removing these barriers, we cannot set up the high quality Ministry of Disaster Management. And we do not have many cases of overcoming such difficulties. So Constitution of Japan was never revised after establishment. And we know that we have to change when it is not appropriate for us, but we do not actually change anything, even if we face the fatal blow. That means when we face the Nankai Trough earthquake, we see the severe damage. And we have to share this idea with everybody to go through the division or innovation. So when the Ministry of Disaster Management is established, without the change, we cannot expect the great improvement will take place. So we have to share this idea among the general public of Japan so that the established or newly established disaster management agency can be the practical and successful one. Of course, there are the many hurdles and challenges we have to overcome to achieve what we want, and we have to be aware of this, and we have to share this idea with you. Of course, we will work hard on our side, but that is not enough. So we need the understanding by the general public. Without that, we cannot realize something great. So we may just have the design without any content or actual work in it. That's the concern I now have about the coming disaster management ministry. So you who are here today and are listening to this event over YouTube, you have the viewpoint that we cannot continue to do what we have been doing. We're trying to do so many things from now, and I want to have your kind understanding about what you're trying to do. And climate disaster with the progress of the global warming, sometimes so many things cannot be foreseen. And then the measures are realized only after the event. So how the general public think about this point would create what kind of would contribute to what kind of disaster management ministry we can have, and what kind of countermeasure will be realized against a disaster. So we will continue to have this DRA forum next year and in years to come to continue to suggest the viewpoints. So even after the establishment of the disaster management ministry, we have to keep an eye on it, and each stakeholder has to deepen understanding about the phenomena so that the ministry will continue to work successfully. Just being receiving so much information without thinking will not bring us to anywhere. So I want you to work with us with such understanding. So please do not let the things in our hands alone. We want to go ahead together with you so that we can have the successful steps toward the disaster prevention. So with the expecting Ministry of the Disaster Management to come, in order to make it successful, we had the ideas and shared by these three specialists on the stage, and we'll keep them in mind to make the steps forward into the future. And I really ask for your kind understanding and cooperation. And time has come to conclude this panel discussion. Thank you very much for your attention to the end. So, Mr. Professor Takakita, Mr. Takayabu, Mr. Professor Yamata, and Mr. Kawada, thank you very much. Three panelists, please go back to your seat. Thank you very much for your attendance. So, in conclusion, I would like to ask Mr. Yoshiaki Kawada, Executive Director, Disaster Reduction and Human Renovation Institution, to give us the closing remark. So, participants, thank you so much for your attendance to the end of the program today. And the DRA Forum will be held next year. It should be held next year, 2 years from now. And I turned 79 years old to this year. And that may come the time I cannot be active as researcher sometime in the future. So how to succeed this event or activity into the future is very important. 30 years ago, there was the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake, and the DRI was established, and we have been having this DRA forum. And this activity has to be continued into the future. And if we do not take this initiative, no other organization or no other stakeholder will do that. So the role we play is great important, and I don't say that will be highly appreciated by the external organizations, but it is only in Kobe and with the RI we are having this initiative. So your participation in the panel discussion, you may find that we face difficulty in proceeding with our initiatives, but if you can think that you may cooperate in somewhere to face up against the difficulty together with us, I am very grateful for that. And without that attitude, we cannot continue. But through the continuation of the activities, we can gain power. So we have to continue to have the DLA forum, even with the changes in the faces of the participants. And this is a message from us, and please take this message back with you. And I very much appreciate if you can provide us the better support based on the deeper understanding of what we're doing. And thank you so much for your cooperation in advance.
Thank you very much. With this, we'd like to conclude International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum 2025 Part 2. Thank you very much for your participation.